The spaceship USS Oregon moved slowly. Through the dark void of space, it stopped near the edge of the Zenthari. Empire, the stars here looked different. Then back home, they were colder and farther away, inside the ship Captain Luke Carter stood near the transport pad. He adjusted his uniform carefully. He was a tall man with strong shoulders. Beside him stood Megan Scott. She was the diplomatic officer for the mission. She held a data pad tight in her hands. She looked very nervous. This mission was very important for everyone. If they failed, a big war would start across the sector. Luke checked his rifle quietly. It was a standard issue weapon for human soldiers. It was black and heavy in his hands. He liked the weight of it. It made him feel safe in the strange place. Megan saw him checking the weapon. She put her hand on his arm. Gently, she shook her head slightly. "Keep it slung," she whispered softly. "Do not hold it ready to fire. The aliens are watching us closely. They want a reason to fight." Luke nodded. Slowly, he let the rifle hang by his side. He knew she was right about the rules, but he did not like feeling unsafe around them. The transport beam took them away from the Oregon ship. In a blink of blue light, they were gone. They appeared on the alien flagship station. The air changed instantly. Around them, it was very cold inside the station. It smelled like ozone and metallic dust. It was hard to breathe. The thin air. The room was huge and empty. The walls were made of dark crystal. They glowed with a faint blue light. Tall statues stood everywhere in the hall. They were statues of conquered leaders from other worlds. Their faces looked sad and broken. Luke looked at them closely. He did not show fear on his face. He kept his face calm and steady. Alien guards stood along the walls silently. They were the Zenthari warriors. They were very tall compared to humans. They were twice the size of a normal man. Their skin looked like gray stone. They wore armor made of sharp crystal. They held long plasma lances in their hands. Their eyes were dark and empty. They watched the humans with disdain. They looked at Luke like he was a small bug. Megan walked forward. "Bravely, we are here for peace," she said softly, but the guards did not answer her. They just stared with cold eyes. Luke walked beside Megan slowly. His boots made loud sounds on the floor. The sound echoed in the big hall. They began to walk down a long corridor. The walls were lined with trophies from wars. There were weapons from other species. There were flags and broken shields on display. Some of them looked very old and dusty. This place was a museum of victory for the aliens. It was a warning to anyone who visited here. Megan whispered to Luke again. "Negotiations are critical," she said. "We must not anger them today, but we cannot show weakness either." Luke understood the hard balance. They walked for a long time together. The corridor seemed to go on forever. The cold air bit at their skin. Luke kept his hand near his pocket. He was ready for anything bad. The Zenthari guards walked behind them quietly. Their heavy steps shook the floor slightly. Luke could feel their eyes on his back. He did not turn around to look. He kept looking forward only. Finally, they reached the end of the hall. Massive doors stood before them now. They were made of black metal. They were closed tight and locked. Megan stopped in front of the big doors. She took a deep breath of air. She fixed her jacket carefully. Luke stood beside her firmly. He stood tall and ready. He was ready to protect her if needed. The doors began to open. Slowly, a deep grinding sound filled the air. Light poured out from the other side. It was bright and white light. Luke squinted his eyes against the glare. He gripped his rifle strap tight. He did not know what was behind the doors, but he knew it would be dangerous. The laughter of the aliens was waiting for them inside, but for now there was only silence. The doors opened wide. They stepped forward into the unknown room. The massive doors opened wide with a loud grinding noise. Bright light flooded the hallway where Luke and Megan stood. They had to shield their eyes for a moment. When the light faded, they saw the throne room. It was a huge space with a high ceiling. The walls were made of sharp black crystal. They looked like jagged teeth pointing inward. The floor was smooth and reflective like dark water. Dozens of alien nobles stood on platforms around the room. They were all looking down at the two humans. The humans looked very small in this big place. The aliens were tall and wide. Their armor sparkled in the dim light. At the far end of the room was a raised platform. On top of it sat the High Archon Vrel. He was the largest alien they had seen yet. His skin was gray and rough like stone. He wore a robe made of metallic threads. He sat on a throne made of solid black crystal. It looked heavy and dangerous. Sharp points stuck out from the back of the chair. Vrel did not move when they entered. He just watched them with cold eyes. His hands rested on the arms of the throne. His fingers were long and had sharp claws. The air in the room was even colder than the hallway. Luke could see his breath in the air. Megan stood straight. She did not shake despite the fear. A sound came from the throne. It was a voice speaking in their language. It was a translation from a device near the Archon. The voice boomed through the hall. It sounded deep and rough. Archon asked why humans were here. He asked why they claimed the border systems. His voice showed he did not respect them. Megan stepped forward. Bravely, she held up her data pads. These pads had all the proof they needed. They had maps and legal documents. She tried to speak calmly. She said they came for peace and trade. She wanted to show the data to the Archon, but the aliens did not care about the papers. The nobles on the platform started to whisper. They pointed at Luke and Megan. They looked at Luke's uniform. It was simple cloth and light material. They looked at his skin. It looked soft to them. They did not wear heavy armor like the Zinthari. The aliens thought this meant humans were weak. Archon Vrel leaned forward. On his throne, he laughed a low laugh. The sound echoed off the crystal walls. He said that humans were fragile. He said they broke easily. He did not look at the data pads Megan held. He kept his eyes on Luke. Luke stood still. He did not speak yet. He kept his hands by his side. He watched the Archon carefully. He knew this was a test. They wanted to see if he would get angry. They wanted to see if he would shake. Luke did not do either. He just waited. The Archon raised one large hand. He gestured to the side of the throne. A large warrior stepped out from the shadows. This was the champion of the court. He was bigger than the other guards. He carried a large block of solid steel. He walked to the center of the room. He dropped the steel block on the floor. It made a loud clang sound. The champion looked at Luke. He wanted to show true power. He placed one hand on the steel block. Metal was thick and hard. Human tools could not break it easily. The champion tightened his grip. His muscles moved Under his gray skin, with a slow, crunching sound, he squeezed the steel. The metal began to bend. Everyone in the room watched silently. The steel block crumpled like it was made of paper. The champion crushed it into a small ball. He threw the ball at Luke's feet. It rolled to a stop near his boots. The message was clear. The aliens were strong, humans were weak. The nobles began to murmur again. They looked pleased with the display. They thought this would scare the humans. Megan looked at Luke. She knew this was bad. Diplomacy was failing. The aliens only respected strength. They did not respect laws or papers. Luke looked down at the crushed steel ball. He did not pick it up. He looked back up at the Archon. His face was calm. He did not look impressed by the trick. The Archon waited for a reaction. He wanted to see fear. He wanted to see them run, but Luke stayed standing. He was ready for what came next. The air in the room felt heavy with tension. The aliens waited for the humans to speak, but Luke remained silent. He was thinking about his next move. The game had changed now. It was no longer about words. It was about power, and the aliens thought they had all of it. The silence in the room did not last long. After the steel ball hit the floor, the alien nobles began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle from the back of the room. Then it grew louder and louder. Soon the entire court was laughing at the humans. The sound was harsh and grating. It bounced off the crystal walls and hurt the ears. They pointed their long fingers at Luke and Megan. They thought the crushed steel was a joke to them. They thought humans were toys for their amusement. Archon Vrel joined in the laughter. He leaned back on his black crystal throne. He looked very pleased with himself. He believed he had won the contest. Before it truly began, he enjoyed the fear he thought he saw. Luke stood still. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just watched the Archon. His face was like stone. Megan felt anger rise in her chest. Her hands tightened on the data pads. She stepped forward again. She tried to speak over the noise of the crowd. She said that humanity was not here to serve. She said they were here as equals. She said they had rights, but Vrel raised his hand. He cut her off instantly. The laughter stopped for a moment. The Archon spoke again. His voice was loud and clear. Through the translator, he said that equals must have equal power. He said humans had no power. He looked at Luke's thin arms. He looked at the simple rifle on Luke's back. He called it a toy. He said their plasma lances could melt a ship from far away. He said human weapons were like sticks made of wood. He said they were useless. Here the nobles laughed again. They liked their leader's words. They mocked the human uniform. They said it looked like cloth for children. They said human skin was soft like fruit. They said it would tear easily under a claw. One noble stepped closer to Luke. He tapped Luke's chest plate with a sharp claw. He said the material was weak. He said a single blow would crack it. Luke did not flinch. He did not move a muscle. Noble laughed and walked away. He thought he had touched a coward, but Luke was just waiting. He was counting the seconds. He was watching the guards. He was learning the room. Vrel stood up from his throne. He was very tall. His shadow fell over Luke. He walked down the steps of the platform. He stopped just a few feet from the soldier. He looked down at Luke with hate in his eyes. He said that humanity should be a servant race. He said they could clean the floors of the station. He said they could mine the asteroids for the Empire. He said this was the only use for weak beings. He spat on the floor near Luke's boot. It was a sign of great disrespect. Megan opened her mouth to argue. She wanted to tell him about human history. She wanted to tell him about human wars. She wanted to say that humans never gave up, but Luke put a hand on her shoulder. He shook his head slightly. He told her to wait. He knew words would not work. Now the aliens only understood force. Vrel saw the gesture. He thought Luke was stopping her from begging. He smiled. A sharp smile. He turned around and walked back to his throne. He sat down heavily. The crystal creaked under his weight. He pointed a claw at the seat behind him. The black crystal glowed in the dim light. The Archon made a challenge. He said that if humans were so strong they could prove it. He pointed to the black crystal throne. He said it was made of the hardest material in the sector. He said no weapon could scratch it. He said no hand could break it. He challenged Luke to strike the throne. He said if Luke could leave a mark he would listen. He laughed as he said it. He knew it was impossible. The throne was protected by energy fields. It was solid matter, bonded by ancient science. Vrel expected Luke to say no. He expected the human to cower. He wanted to see fear. He wanted to see them run away. Luke looked at the throne. It glowed with a faint dark light. It looked invincible. The aliens watched him closely. They waited for him to drop his weapon. They waited for him to ask for mercy. Laughter began to rise again. It was a sound of pure arrogance. They thought this was a game. They thought the human was a pet. Megan stood very still. She watched Luke's face. She saw something in his eyes. It was not fear. It was calculation. Luke did not move toward the throne yet. He just stood there. The air was thick with tension. The Archon waited for the refusal. He wanted to humiliate them one more time. He told Luke to try. He said, go ahead. He said, break it if you can. The laughter reached its peak. The room shook with the noise of the aliens. They were sure of their victory. They did not know what was coming. Luke took a slow breath. He was ready. The mockery was over. Now action would speak, but first he had to let them laugh. He let them feel safe. He let them feel strong. It would make the next moment much harder for them. The Archon leaned forward. He waited for the human to fail. The court watched with amusement. They did not see the danger. They only saw a small man in a big room. They did not know that size did not matter. They did not know that humans were dangerous. They laughed harder. They thought it was funny. They were wrong. Luke moved his feet slowly. He walked toward the raised platform. The aliens stopped laughing. They watched him closely. They thought he was going to beg. They thought he was going to kneel, but Luke did not kneel. He walked with steady steps. His boots made sound on the hard floor. The sound was loud in the quiet room. The guards tightened their grip on their lances. They were ready to fire. They thought Luke was attacking, but Luke did not look at the guards. He looked only at the throne. Megan stood behind him. She did not move. She watched his back. She knew what he was doing. They had planned this before they came. It was a backup plan. Luke stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at Archon Vrel. Archon smiled down at him. Vrel thought the human was foolish. He waited for Luke to touch the crystal. He wanted to see the human fail. Luke reached into his tactical vest. His hand went inside a pocket. The alien guards raised their Weapons, they made clicking sounds. They wanted to stop him, but Vrel raised a hand. He told them to wait. He wanted to see what the human would do, he thought. It would be a small knife. He thought it would be useless. Luke pulled out a small object. It was a cylinder made of metal. It was silver and smooth. It fit in his palm. The aliens did not know what it was. They thought it was a grenade. They thought it was a bomb. Vrel laughed again. He said a small toy would not break the throne. He said the human was crazy. Luke did not answer. He looked at Megan one more time. She gave a small nod. It was time. Luke swung his arm. He did not throw it at the aliens. He did not throw it at the Archon. He threw it at the seat of the throne. The cylinder flew through the air. It landed softly on the black crystal. It did not bounce. It stuck to the surface. Aliens waited for an explosion. They waited for fire, but there was no fire. There was no smoke. Instead, a sound began. It was a low hum at first. Then it got higher. It was a sharp noise. It was like a whistle, but deeper. The black crystal began to shake. The vibration was visible. The throne moved. On the platform, Vrel looked down at the device. His smile disappeared. He tried to stand up. He wanted to jump away, but the vibration was too fast. His legs felt weak. The hum grew louder. It filled the whole room. The nobles covered their ears. The sound hurt them. But the crystal hurt more. Lines appeared on the throne. They were thin white cracks. They spread quickly. They looked like lightning on the black surface. The Archon shouted orders. He told his guards to shoot the device, but it was too late. The cracks met each other. The structure failed. The black crystal could not hold the sound. With a loud snap, the throne broke. It did not break into pieces. It turned into dust. The energy holding it together was gone. The seat collapsed under Vrel. The Archon fell hard to the floor. He landed on his back. The dust cloud covered him. He coughed in the gray cloud. The sound stopped suddenly. The silence was heavy. The aliens stood frozen. They could not move. They looked at the broken dais. They looked at their leader on the floor. The throne was gone. It was just a pile of gray powder. Luke stood still. He did not smile. He did not cheer. He just watched. The guards lowered their weapons slowly. They were shocked. They had never seen this happen. Their strongest symbol was destroyed. It took only seconds. Luke had not used a big gun. He had used science. He had used knowledge. The aliens looked at Luke with new eyes. They did not see a weak creature anymore. They saw a danger. Vrel pushed himself up. He was covered in dust. He looked at the empty space where his throne was. He looked at Luke. He had no words. The laughter was gone. The mockery was dead. Only the truth remained. Humans were not weak. They were smart, and smart was dangerous. Room waited for Luke to speak, but he said nothing. He let the broken throne speak for him. The message was clear. Do not test humanity. The cost is too high. The aliens understood now. They stood in silence. They waited for the next move. Luke turned slightly. He looked at Megan. She was safe. The mission was still on, but the balance had changed. The humans were not begging anymore. They were in control. The Archon sat on the floor. He was no longer high above them. He was on their level. The power shift was complete. The shattered crystal lay around them. It sparkled in the light. It was a reminder of pride. Broken. Luke took a breath. The air was still cold, but the room felt different. The fear was gone, now there was respect, and that was worth more than gold. The aliens watched the human soldier. They did not laugh again. They knew better now. The soldier stood tall. He was ready for anything, but nothing else needed to be broken. The point was made. The throne was dust, and the human stood firm. Luke stood in the center of the room. The gray dust from a throne settled slowly around his boots. The silence was heavy and thick. No one moved, no one spoke. The alien nobles looked at the empty space where the throne used to be. They looked at their leader on the floor. Vrel pushed himself up slowly. He brushed the crystal dust from his robe. His face was hard to read. He looked angry, but he also looked afraid. He looked at Luke with new eyes. He did not see a weak servant anymore. He saw a dangerous equal. Luke did not move his hands. He kept them by his side. He waited for the Archon to speak. Luke broke the silence first. His voice was calm and steady. He said that humanity did not want to break things, he said. They preferred to build, but he said they could destroy if they had to. He looked around the room at the guards. He said the device was small, he said. Humans had many more like it, he said. They did not come here to fight. He came here to stop a war. The words hung in the cold air. The aliens listened carefully. They understood the message. Humans were peaceful, but they were not weak. Megan stepped forward slowly. She walked to the broken dais. She placed the data pads on the flat surface. Black crystal was gone, but the stone base remained. She arranged the pads neatly. She said the terms were still the same. She said peace was still possible. She said respect was the only thing that changed. Vrel looked at the data pads. He looked at the dust on his hands. He felt humbled. He had mocked the humans. He had laughed at them. Now he stood on the floor while they stood tall. He realized his mistake. He had underestimated them. That was a dangerous era for a leader. He looked at his guards. They were still holding their weapons. They looked confused. Vrel raised his hand. He signaled them to lower their lances. The guards obeyed. Slowly, they put the weapons down. Tension in the room began to fade. Air felt less heavy. Vrel took a deep breath. He looked at Luke. He nodded his head slightly. It was a sign of respect. He said he would review the claims. He said the border systems would be discussed. He said there would be no war. Today, Luke nodded back. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He just accepted the agreement. He turned to Megan. They were done here. They had won. Without firing a shot, they had used their minds instead of violence. That was the human way. They turned around to leave. They did not run. They did not show their backs in fear. They walked with confidence. The alien nobles parted to let them through. They watched the humans walk past. No one laughed now. No one mocked them. They watched with silence and respect. Luke and Megan walked down the long corridor. The statues of conquered leaders seemed different now. They did not look so scary. The humans passed the guards at the door. The transport beam waited for them. They stepped into the light. Blue energy took them away. They appeared back on the USS Oregon. The air smelled clean here. It smelled like oil and recycled air. It smelled like home. Luke took off his rifle. He placed it on the rack. Megan let out a long breath. She sat down in a chair. She was tired, but happy. They had secured the sector. They had saved many lives. Luke looked out the window. The alien flagship floated in the dark space. It was quiet. Now, the lights on the station did not seem so threatening. Luke knew that aliens would remember this day. They would remember the shattered throne. They would remember the human soldier who stood firm. The story of this day would spread. Other species would hear about it. They would know that humans were not easy prey. They would know that humanity was strong. Luke walked to the bridge of the ship. He sat in the captain's chair. He looked at the stars. They looked bright and clear. He thought about the future. There would be more challenges. There would be more enemies. But humans would be ready. They would stand together. They would use their minds and their strength. Luke gave the order to move out. The engines hummed to life. The ship turned away from the Empire. They headed back to human space. Peace was kept for now, and that was enough. The crew worked quietly. Mission was a success. Luke looked at Megan. She smiled at him. It was a small smile, but it meant everything. They had faced the unknown, and they had won. Void of space was vast and dark, but humanity brought their own light. They moved forward into the stars. They were ready for whatever came next. The galaxy was big, but humans were bigger.